You're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, local news, and all that jazz with your host, Elia Sinclair. Tune in for a new show every Friday at 106.5 KQWZ LP-FM, South King County.
Hello and welcome to this week's show of the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about art, life, local news, and all that jazz. I'm your host, Elia Sinclair, and today we're going to kick off with a segment I call Food for Thought. Artists of all stripes feel compelled to create their work. The painter to paint, the singer to sing, the actor to act. It's alike to the biblical David who, trying to keep silent, proclaimed, "I was mute and silent. I held my peace to no avail, and my distress grew worse. My heart became hot within me. As I mused, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue." To keep still and silent under the compulsion of the spirit of creativity is anguish, yet we as artists tend to find any and every excuse we can think of not to answer the call. We are tired. We slept too much. The laundry needs done. The dishes need washed. We haven't the space. We haven't the time. We haven't the tools. On and on the excuses roll as our art lays fallow and untouched, and we feel there is nothing at all we can do about it. Life's demands and obligations do exist, it's true, but how often are they hindrances to our work, and how often are they handy excuses to keep ourselves from it? Maybe the fiery prick of the creative muse burns so hot because it's precisely the level of discomfort necessary to move us out of our excuses and into the action of creation. I personally have been guilty many times of waiting for the perfect time and place to begin to create when all it truly requires is to be done. I don't need the hours of stress-free, well-rested, perfect headspace and uninterrupted time that I think I do. I simply need to do the thing, wherever and however my current state exists. I'm reminded of my favorite poet, Emily Dickinson. By the age of 30, she seldom left her bedroom. The desk, where she spent most of her days, would be considered only a side table to many of us. 17.5 inches was all the space she needed to pen 1,700 poems that would survive the test of time. A tiny desk in a tiny room and innumerable scraps of paper gave us the catalog of one of America's greatest poets. So what excuse do we have? Of course, it's ideal to wait on a spot at a writer's retreat in the south of France, to run the vacuum instead of writing for 20 minutes, answering an email instead of practicing your scales or reciting a monologue. But your art will never be brought to life that way. Find your 17.5 inches, your metaphorical tiny bedroom, and possessively sculpt your day around the time you spend there. We, all of us, have the capacity to create, but we must choose it. Like David, we must relieve the burn in our hearts by allowing ourselves to speak. And like Emily, we must not be afraid to speak boldly.
You're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, local news, and all that jazz with your host, Elia Sinclair, at 106.5 KQWZ LP-FM, South King County.
Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Elia Sinclair, and you're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, local news, and all that jazz. Today, I am here with props artisan extraordinaire, Hannah Fenske. Hello, and thanks for being here.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
So I'd love to start with you giving us some background on your work as a props artisan. I know that you worked at the Seattle Opera for many years, and you now work at the Fifth Avenue Theater. Can you describe a bit about the work you do? I know that's pretty broad, but sort of the TLDR of props artistry.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of people, when I tell them what I do, are like, that sounds so cool, but they have very little sense of what I do.
What it is, yeah.
So I'm actually kind of used to describing what I do. It
Oh,
comes
there
up
you
a
go.
lot. Basically, when you go to a show, any sort of stage show, anything that's on stage, very loose definitions, anything that's on stage that's not like the walls and the floor or being worn is a prop. It can encompass anything from suitcases, furniture, greenery, food, sometimes real food, I've never had to do this, but animals are technically props. Like it encompasses a very wide range of objects and purposes that need to be served and whatnot. And so as a props artisan, I am responsible for creating and sometimes acquiring or altering or designing all of those things, the things that end up on stage that help tell the story of the show in thing speak. So
Yes,
that's
telling stories through objects and, it turns out, animals. So if there are animals in a show, are you responsible for like caring for that animal?
That gets a little wiggly. Like I said, I've never had to do this personally, but I know a lot of people who have. Oftentimes, there will be an animal handler, someone who specifically works with those animals or that type of animal. But I also have heard stories of, there's a musical Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, I think, and there's a puppy at the end of the show. And theaters are always like, okay, does anybody have a golden retriever puppy that we can borrow for the run of the show? It's a whole thing. I know that Village Theater did that a few years back, and they ended up having 2 separate puppies throughout the run because their run was very long. And they were adopted out. It was planned ahead that they were adopted out by members of the production team after the fact. So the theater sort of adopted these puppies for the show, and they were handled by the run crew backstage during the run of the show, and then they had pre-planned homes so they would go to. So now they're great shop dogs.
Love that. Yeah, they'd be very used to that world.
Yeah.
I was in a college production of a show called The Effect of Gamma Rays on Man in the Moon Marigolds. I think it's got a title. Yeah, I'm surprised I remembered it. I'm like, something to do with marigold. But they had a rabbit in the show. And I wasn't in the show. I wrote the music for the show, and I lived with the director at the time, and the director is the one who had to deal with the rabbit.
Funny.
So we lived in this basement apartment, we're college students, and one night we hear this and the rabbit had gotten out and was just running all over this basement apartment in the middle of the night. Yeah, it had rabbit zoomies in the middle of the night. That was an interesting semester. That's my experience with stage animals. So I think probably the second most common question you get, and what I think a lot of people are probably curious about, is what is the path into this line of work? And like many creative professions, I imagine it's varied. There are very few set paths to any creative profession. Yeah. But if you could talk a bit about what your path has been, and if there is a typical path, what that might look like.
Yeah, you're correct. There are some sort of wide and varied routes in which people find themselves in this work. Mine was actually pretty direct. I did theater in high school. I went to a teeny high school. I loved it. I had a pretty limited understanding of the different things you could do professionally with theater. I was like, oh, you can do scenery, you can design and build scenery. You can do lights, sound, and costumes, or you can act, or you can direct, or you can stage manage. And that was my whole understanding of like what theater could look like as a career. And then I got to college, and I was in Theater 101 because I liked theater, and it was a undergrad credit. And my professor started talking about all the different roles in theater and sort of like the hierarchy of a sort of standard theater company, and all the different who reports to who and who does what, and my understanding of what it actually takes real world to do theater was so broadened. It's like, oh, I had no idea, because again, I went to a pretty small school. Please fund the arts because they're so important. And then my professor started talking about props people, about the props department, and I was like, that's a department? Because my friend Katie and I had sort of quote unquote done props when we were in high school. We were the ones who kind of got interested in going and rooting around in the moldy closet off of the basement gym for each show. Like, oh, we need a suitcase. Oh, well, we have tons of suitcases because people donate suitcases over the years. Oh, we need a table. Well, we've got 2 tables. Let's pick the one that kind of works with the show. We quote unquote did props because that was interesting to us. But I didn't know that was something you could do professionally. I had no idea. So my professor is talking about, well, props people is kind of sort of describing the role and what people are like. And props people are resourceful and like to work with their hands and appreciate antiques and enjoy thrift shopping and treasure hunting and have, good eye for creativity and think outside the box. And I'm looking at myself going, that describes me perfectly. This sounds so. I took that. I had originally I was going to go into environmental science, and I'm still passionate about that. But I took that information and my love of theater and my love of art. I had taken all the art courses in my high school because I thought it was just super, super fun and I loved it, but I didn't want to be a starving artist, so I didn't pursue it. And I went, well, I talked to my parents and they were, of course, like, oh, our daughter going into the arts, like, that's scary financially, you know, but they've always been incredibly supportive, which was so, 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 so valuable as a young person pursuing a quote unquote risky career, you know, something that's less sort of standard in the eyes of society.
Yeah.
And they encouraged me to call someone or get in touch with someone in the industry.
That's wise.
Like actually doing what I wanted to do and to see like, okay, is this actually a real career? Because they'd never heard of this, right? They didn't know that this was something that someone could do. And I did, and I ended up speaking with Diana Gervais, who actually was, at the time, she was the props master for the Fifth Avenue Theater, which, funny enough, I've actually never met her, but I hear about her all the time because she left the Fifth Ave a few years ago, but she's still, her, you know, influence is still there. Yeah. But I ended up speaking with her and found out, yes, this is actually a career. Yes, it is in the arts, like you have to be prepared for that, but as I am now in this career, I can totally, you know, back this up. The best people, the coolest, funniest, don't take themselves too seriously, creative, unusual people work in this field, and I love it. And so with sort of that sign off, I switched majors and I pursued a double major in theater and art. I got concentrations in technical theater because that was about as close as I could get to props. We didn't even have a props class.
Oh wow.
And sculpture. I majored in sculpture as well. So I kind of meshed the two, and so I sort of, you know, if you think about it in a very sort of theoretical sense, I do sculpture for theater.
Yeah, that's true. And it seems like it would marry a great deal of skill sets. I know that you have a lot of skill sets, and we were talking last night that you're going to have to weld soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you do carpentry. And so are these skills that you picked up along the way? You learn on the job? Was it part of your education in any way?
Sort of both. I started doing some prop projects in high school with the theater program. You know, again, they didn't even have a props class. So really the biggest thing I learned in school, which has ended up being so valuable, is how to seek out and sort of fight for the information that I needed and the skills that I needed, because nobody was just going to give them to me.
Right.
And that is so prevalent in theater and just in the arts in general.
Yes.
Being in the United States where they're underfunded, you know, we're constantly having to sort of battle for the things that we need.
Yeah.
And props is also a classically misunderstood department because it's sort of a sub-department. It technically falls under scenic. It falls under the scenic designer because the scenic designer is in charge of the look of the show, sort of the aesthetic of the whole show. Costumes is its whole own thing, but they usually collaborate pretty closely with the costume designer because, again, it's the whole aesthetic.
The whole show, yeah.
And then props falls under that as well. What were we? I lost my train of thought.
We were talking about all the skills you've acquired, and you answered a theme that's come up again and again on the show from artists of all stripes, from all walks, is that very thing. It's the initiative, the versatility, all of these skills that are required to be an artist, a professional artist in particular. And we always come back to the joke of like, hire artists, hire theater people in particular, because the show will go on with a house on fire, sometimes literally on fire. I talked to the Burien Actors Theater artistic director, and they had a fire, and the show had to go on. You know,
oh my gosh.
So yes, hire artists.
Yeah.
The skills might not look transferable immediately, but they are.
Oh, I can speak to that.
Yeah, please do.
Something that I've been kind of realizing recently is the value of being someone working in the theater arts. It's not just like, oh, we put stuff on stage to entertain you. No. It's so much more than that. And everyone that I work with, you know, one thing that like I tell people, they're like, oh, you know, you work in the arts. I'm like, yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
Like we don't make a lot, you know, we make it work. You know, we do our best, but the thing that is so wonderful about working in the arts, when you get to find, you know, especially when you get to find a pocket of it that is supported enough where you feel you can actually do what you really want and you're not just scrambling to survive, you get to work with the absolute best people. I said that earlier, you're speaking about props people specifically, but it does spread to all people in theater and just in the arts, because you don't work in the arts unless you really care about it.
Yeah.
You have to be so passionate about doing what you want to do, which has always been crucial to me. I could never work in a career that isn't important to me
Same.
and that I don't feel matters.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of working in this field, is that you get to work with a bunch of really passionate people, people who really care. And that can lead to interesting, like, tensions and drama, because people just really care about making something beautiful and doing their very best and making art, making something cohesively wonderful, that it's a very, very collaborative art form, theater. You are constantly checking in with everyone else who's working on the same show, because every single little element of a show is interwoven with every single other element.
Yeah.
For example, like, if I need to make a prop or bring, have a prop that makes noise, maybe someone hits it and it makes a certain sound. Well, I might have to go have a conversation with the music director, with Maestro, because that sound might need to fit in with the music at a certain tone. I also need to have a conversation with the actor to make sure that whatever they're hitting it with works for their motion. Need to coordinate with stage management and the director to make sure that visually, with how the performer's using it, it makes sense. I might need to make sure that it's a certain weight, because maybe a performer needs to hold it in a certain way. I'm making up a prop in my head this way, but it might need to fit in a pocket. I might need to go have a conversation with costumes to make sure that there's a pocket in whatever they're wearing that fits this object, and I can't make it a certain size because it won't fit. Like, all of those things inform just one object.
I was going to say,
a show.
Yeah, that's one example of how complicated this actually is. It's not just like, oh yeah, go find something and ta-da.
We don't work in a vacuum, right?
Right.
And that's something that I've learned I really, really love about working in theater, is how collaborative it is. Collaborative. And getting to chat with so many people and have these conversations and make something beautiful together. It's a little community, both by nature of what we do and what we are making. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And to answer your earlier question, I realized, tangents, this is what we do.
Yes.
I learned the skills that I use every day as far as the practical hands-on skills, both in a combination of picking up what I could in college through sculpture. Like, I took wood sculpture classes, so I could learn how to use certain wood tools, because I didn't really have an opportunity to do that as a kid or in high school. And then, like, I took a metal sculpture class so I could learn welding, because I also hadn't had the opportunity to do that. I also worked in the scene shop at my college to kind of get more of a sense of building scenery and sort of more the construction, sort of carpentry side of theater, rather than the crafty set. Props can kind of fall into two categories, kind of into the prop crafts, which is, molding and casting, sewing, soft goods, painting, sort of the, the craftier side of things. And then props carpentry, which is more welding. Carpentry, you can get into some people. I know props people who've gotten into fiberglass.
Oh, cool.
Who do, bigger. Some props are huge. There's all sorts of variety of skills that go into making any given show come to life. So I picked up some of those skills in high school or in college, and then also just hands-on. Like, one of my absolute personal favorite skills to utilize in theater is upholstery. Nice. I love doing upholstery. There's something about it, and it's very rewarding to me in how my brain works. And I had never done anything like that until my first professional gig, my first internship, and I was, they're like, yep, you do have to, by hand, pull out every single staple in this chair. That's how it goes. I was like, there's no, shortcut. There's no tool that does this. Like, no.
Control V, Control C.
Yeah. It's like, you have to take, a tack puller, and you have to pry every single one out. But then you get to replace it of the fabric and put all the staples in and
make it beautiful.
Make it beautiful. Make it and something about that I love. And I've learned to enjoy the satisfaction of ripping staples out of a piece
become
of furniture.
meditative.
It kind of does.
I will say Hannah is one of my friends, and she's a very handy friend to have because she is very good at repairing chair. I had this antique chair that with a wobbly leg for years and years. I'm like, man, I don't even know how to fit. And you looked at it, and you're like, oh yeah, I can fix this in in 5 minutes. You can tighten the bolt in, and it's beautiful and solid, and there it sits. And every time I look at the chair, I think of you.
Aww.
Yes, Hannah.
That's very sweet.
So let's see. There was a few questions that popped into mind as you were talking. I want to know, because you did work with the Seattle Opera for many years. I want to know, is there any functional difference in doing props for the opera versus theater proper? Or is it all pretty much the same process?
That's a great question. I have worked, over the years, I've worked in making and fabricating and dealing with props for sort of straight plays, for sort of classic theater, for musicals, for opera. Those are sort of the three primary categories, if there were any. And they're all a little bit different. And I think not sort of by nature of just what the art form is. For example, opera, I found oftentimes the performers, you get some really good actors every once in a while, but oftentimes the performers are less focused on, it's a little less action, hands-on driven than, maybe a classic just actor is going to be, how they're going to be interacting with the props.
It's all in the singing.
Right.
Singing to the crowd.
It's music focused. And I mean, believe me, there's some incredible opera that is so gripping to watch and what they're doing. And sometimes opera can be dance centric, which is really cool. Opera and ballet have a long history of working together. But I have found that a lot of opera tends to be rather grand and on a very large scale, which can be really fun. I love this more sculptural element of props where you get to really make something kind of fantastical and unique. That's my, when I get to be a mixed media artist, but for theater, when that really gets to come out. And so sometimes that has more prevalence than in the other art forms. Straight plays can often be hyper realistic. You get sets that are very heavily dressed out. There's lots of stuff on stage. Because you get, oftentimes those are very up close and personal shows. You get some of the smaller venues where people are going to see things up close. Whereas in opera, you're going to have an orchestra pit, presumably, unless it's a unique sort of theater space. And so when you have an orchestra pit, the closest audience member is at least 20 plus 30 feet away. And that distance actually informs how you make a prop a lot, because
right.
It's called the 30-foot rule.
It's got to be big enough to be seen.
It's got to be big enough to be seen to a point, depending on the piece, but also there's a level of forgiveness there. We need to, for example, here's a really common one. We need to strike a match on stage. You have actual fire. That's a whole thing with safety and whatnot. But if they need to strike a match, well, most matches nowadays are green. The little red, the little end that historically has been red is now green on almost all matches that you find, or it's red with a white tip.
Yeah.
If you're in a tiny theater where the audience member's 2 feet away from you, you better be able to find those red matches, or someone's going to be pulled out of that world that you've got it set in the 20s.
Right.
That kind of thing. But on a 30-foot stage, nobody cares. that becomes entirely irrelevant. And that is a very micro example. But that also applies to how detailed your paint finish needs to be on something, how much you can get away with having fake food rather than real food. Is someone eating really close to the audience or not? It applies to all manner of things. So the size of the house can oftentimes impact how props are realized and how detail-oriented they do or don't need to be. And then in musicals, performers are really rough on things in musicals. Musicals are all over the place. People, if you give them a piece of furniture, they're going to want to dance on it. They're going to want to stand on it. A chair, they're going to want to spin it on one leg and hop around on stage on it. I mean, this literally in this show that we're working on right now, that is happening. We're finding that the chairs the bolts are coming loose left and right. I glued one up and they broke through the glue on the first day. And it's oh man. So then it's okay, are we going to have to build a steel frame to sort of sneakily mount into this antique chair? Oftentimes that happens in musicals because there's dancing, there's a lot of movement. Oftentimes you have things coming in and out, and there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of big, bold motion, which you might not get as much in a straight play. Things get used more heavily.
Yeah.
In music. Well, and oftentimes musicals, they can have longer runs. They can be on stage for longer, so you have to make sure that the life of an object, its durability, will last for the run of the show and potentially beyond. Because what if some other theater's going to take the show after the fact? That happens.
Yeah, I mean, yet again, another layer of complexity that we might not have to think about. How does that chair last night after night after night if they're dancing on it or whatnot?
Right, like a standard chair you have in your house is not designed to be. It's I mean, like you can, like maybe you can stand on it every once in a while to change a light bulb. You should use a ladder, by the way. You should use a step ladder. Be safe. But sometimes we do that. But in theater, if they're going to be standing on it over and over and over again every night, and it's being moved around by stage crew, most furniture is just not designed to do that. And so we have to retrofit or build something from scratch that will hold up to that. And that's a really common thing we encounter.
Yeah. You'd mentioned about the matches. I was wondering about the elements or anytime there's a scene. Because I had the pleasure of seeing one of the operas you worked on, La Boheme. Is that how you say
La
it?
Boheme.
La Boheme. And one of their scenes is like it's a winterscape and there's snow and everything. So do you deal with like fake snow or smoke or fog or anything like that? So you do that as well?
Yes, a lot of sort of what kind of special effects tend to fall to the props department. A lot of theaters, it's a little bit different depending on who handles it. On sort of an official, like professional union level scale, it tends to fall to the props department. Sometimes some theaters will have special effects departments. Like if it's a show that's very heavily special effects oriented. For example, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
Yes.
I think they have a whole separate team of people
would
who
need one.
manage who manage the tricks and the effects and the smoke and the pyro. Pyro is sort of its own thing. I didn't work on it, but the Seattle Opera has done many iterations of Wagner's The Ring Cycle. And one of them, most of them, but one in particular, the entire stage was on fire.
Oh my gosh.
Literally the entire stage, the entire set, everything for hours.
Oh my gosh.
For hours on end, it was on fire. And so, like, you have a pyro team. You have a pyro team who is, running the gas lines and who's monitoring and who has licenses, because that stuff
insurance.
Yes. There's, there's a whole stash of fire blankets at the opera because of, safety issues. And there's dozens of fire extinguishers left over from that era that we maintain because they maintain. I say we because I used to work there.
Yeah.
That happens. So that is like props adjacent. It depends. It depends on the scale.
Yeah.
But I've done a lot of work with dry ice. That's really common in theater. That falls to the props department. Snow definitely does, whether it's snow. If it's snow machines, that's probably going to involve the electrics team because they'll need to rig them up. But managing... if you have like plastic flake snow or paper bits, physical snow, that tends to be managed by the props department because the props department, certainly in a union context, which I am of, they also take care of a lot of other things in theater. The props department's responsible for the floors.
Oh.
For the cleaning and care of the floor, like any mopping, any sweeping, which we do frequently, to keep the stage ready to go.
Something else I didn't know.
Yes, props department is also in charge of cleaning and cleaning up the snow that we are responsible for.
Do you ever do like looking for little nails or snags in the wood and like that kind of thing, like inspection? That's the word I'm looking for.
Oh, sort of. I mean, we keep an eye on the floor because during the run of a show, because we are the ones sort of caring for it.
Right.
A lot of that happens ahead of time. If you have a dance-heavy show, for example, we did White Christmas recently. There was a time during load-in of the scenery when the floor was all installed, when it was all finalized, the dance captain and the choreographer came up and studied the floor up really close and scuffed their shoes around and pointed out that floor was in pretty bad shape. We received it from it had been on the road for many years, so it was a little worn, but there were dozens really of spots on the floor where it wasn't quite level, or there was a seam just a little proud of the floor, spots where they flagged them. They put little spots of tape all over the deck. They said, this is potentially a trip hazard and we need to plane this smooth. And so our carpenters came in and, did a whole refinishing of a bunch of the floor because that floor is solid oak.
Oh, wow. And so that does
it's
have
such a tap-heavy show.
I ask because I tend to have a paranoia of that, like as an actor on the stage. I did, a show in college where I played a mermaid, so I had to be barefoot. And the whole time I was just paranoid, like, is there going to be a nail left here? Is there going to be something that I'm going to step on? So it's a paranoia I have, or I'm going to trip in front of 1,000 people or whatever it is because there's some floor. And so I did think, like, all that dancing and stuff people do, that it'd be nice not to have to worry about it. It's nice to know there's a dedicated team of professionals taking care of the floor.
Yes,
so that doesn't happen.
We do prioritize that. There is a notice gone out as soon as into rehearsal they decide that someone's going to be barefoot. Everyone's notified. Like, just so you know, ahead of time during the show, we're going to have to be really, really careful and sweep and mop frequently to make sure that nothing ends up on the floor for those reasons.
Yeah. Which, I mean, in a professional show, is probably, there are going to be balances in place. There's a college show, and there might not be, especially my school is also very small. So,
yeah. Of course, yeah. My context of referring to kind of quote unquote how things go is very professional theater oriented. I fully acknowledge there are many theater spaces that do not have these resources, that maybe not be union, that you get one person who's doing 6 different roles backstage because that's all you have.
Yeah.
And that is valid and admirable work as well.
Indeed.
I just have less experience in that realm. But
speaking of your professional life again and the road there, I imagine this is a career where you kind of have to go where the jobs are. I don't imagine there are a ton of them in America. Mm-mm. Was that a consideration when you were choosing your career? And I know you were born and raised? Or raised specifically in North Seattle?
Yeah, I'm from Kirkland, Washington. So I'm from the east side.
So you've been able to stay in the area as a professional.
Yeah.
Was that a happy accident? Were you planning on that? Were you prepared to go wherever? Would you like to go somewhere else?
Yeah. So growing up, I was never. A lot of people, I want to travel the world. I want to go. I was actually not one of those people. It's like I really like this area and I love my family and I'd like to stay local. I learned once I got into the field and was studying in college. I went to Western up in Bellingham, so still in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
I sort of learned that you kind of have to follow the work to start and to get your foot in the door.
Yeah.
In the props field. I mean, in a lot of places, and this is something that I would recommend to anyone who is interested in pursuing theater as a young adult and is kind of getting into the realm. You do not have to go to college to be a theater technician. You really don't. I think there's a lot of value in going to college, both as a theater artist and just as a person. If that's something that is financially feasible and fits into your life, I think that's great. I think you should do it. But it is not absolutely necessary. I work with a lot of people who sort of fell into this world and learned on the job and fell in love with it that way, and that is definitely doable. I went the college route and I loved it, and I think it was really valuable for me as a person. But while I was in school, I went to the Southeastern Theater Conference, which is a big event that happens every year in some part of the southeastern United States. There are other ones, but that's the big one. And a bunch of theaters from all over the country come together, and they have just lists of people they need to hire.
Oh.
And you go with a big stack of resumes in your portfolio if you have one, and you just interview for a whole weekend. And that was a hugely valuable thing for me personally in understanding sort of what the landscape of theaters across the country looks like. Like what kind of work is out there, what scale of work is available in different places, who pays what, honestly, who is able to pay their people, who's able to put people up, is it worth it going and spending a summer in Ohio and picking a random state, to work at a musical theater company for the summer. Is that worth it to me in my career? Do they pay enough? Will they put me up? Like, how sort of prevalent is that theater company? Is it just kind of like a whatever? Or is that one a known one that people see that's on your resume and go, that's a... So that particular event, which I then went to my senior year as well, was really informative to me in like understanding sort of the context of theaters across the country. Because, everybody goes, Broadway, New York is like, it's the only place. And I still get that question. Like, do you ever want to go to Broadway? Do you ever want to work in New York? And yes, New York is sort of the hub for the highest quality and the highest concentration of premier theater in our country. It's the theater hub. It is. I've been to New York. I like New York. I like visiting New York. I do not want to live in New York.
Yeah.
That's another beast, and I respect people who can do it, but that is a lot. And unlike most other cities and theaters that you might get involved in, sort of on spend a summer here, spend a season here, because theater tends to run on either summer stock or season, which is kind of school year or during the summer. Very few theaters are fully year round, except New York. So New York, it's hard to like go spend a summer there working in theater.
Right.
It's like, no. If you go to New York, you're digging in.
Yeah.
You're starting something, and you're probably gonna have to be there for a while before you really get your foot in the door. And so I never really wanted to do that. And so I've worked with a lot of people who have spent time in New York or now are professionals in New York, or took a break briefly and went back. But it's sort of a different world. So all that to say, after graduating sort of my professional path, I took some internships and jobs across the country. I've worked in Florida, St. Louis, Williamstown, Massachusetts, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Brevard, North Carolina. Sort of all different corners.
Yeah, you really have been all over.
Yeah, I bounced around a lot because I felt I was working my way up of sort of improving, learning a lot and growing. Sort of my dream job that I realized at that first SETC was working for the Santa Fe Opera. And they in the grand scheme of things, they pay pretty well, and their props department is 33 people.
Oh, wow.
It's an incredible place to work. Anyone who is interested in going into technical theater, really in any realm, I cannot recommend a place to work more highly than the Santa Fe Opera. And of course, they're only in the summer, but they do beautiful work and really value their artisans and their technicians and young professionals, and cultivating a really healthy and positive environment where you can really dig into making some beautiful art and do it with a lot of cool people and be treated really well by the company in the process. And Santa Fe is stunning. So
yes. Well, this is great for anyone who might be listening who feels like they must be in New York to do something like this. But like you, they might not want to move that far. The city life might not be for them. Like, you can still have a very thriving, stable career in the arts that isn't in New York.
This is very
evident.
true.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So don't give up on your dreams.
No. Yeah, and I kind of had the feeling long term that I wanted to return to Seattle. I wanted to settle in Seattle. I wasn't sure, though, because I was following the work.
Yeah.
And I encourage people who decide to go into this sort of field or are interested in it, like, do go on an adventure. Go travel, open yourself up to new experiences, make connections. The connections that I made over those few years when I was living sort of all over, I still keep in touch with those people. They're still resources to me.
Yeah.
Like, oh, hey, I know that this person works over there,
Theater's a small world.
Theater is such a small world. And the props world is especially small. Yes. Like, I have worked with or am familiar with people in the industry across the country, and that is really helpful. There's actually an organization, the Society for Properties Artisan Managers, that or SPM. It used to be SPAM, but they've changed the name recently, which is cute. I know. It's just SPM now. But it's a sort of connected community of people who work in props. And it is invaluable because, hey, if you're going to do, Little Shop of Horrors, which if anybody is familiar with it, it is a very complex prop show. You've got massive puppet, like there's certain expectations that come with that show and challenges. And like, you've got to have a giant person eating plant. Like, you have to, that's part of the show. So having that community, you can jump on there like, hey, people out there have solved this problem before.
Yeah.
You tackled this specific challenge, which is so unique and specific. How did you do it?
Yeah.
Or do you have these things that I could rent? Maybe can you can we share resources? Can we share information? And I have used that forum many times for solving very specific, unique problems, because that's what we do.
Yeah.
As props people, we solve very specific, unique problems.
That you wouldn't encounter. Where else do you need a man-eating plant?
Exactly. Well, yeah, and there's also, running joke like, oh, you go to a hardware store, you go Home Depot, like, and people are always asking, oh, what do you need? What project are you working on? What do you need this for? And you're like, you never want to tell them, because they won't believe you, or you're going to get the weirdest looks, because everything that we do is like I'm not looking at plumbing parts to plumb a sink. I have done that for theater, but I'm looking at plumbing parts because they look like the neck of a gramophone, and I need something in this specific shape to fit this antique piece that I have. Like, they're not going to be able to help me with that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
That's amazing.
So
that's amazing.
It is a very interconnected community, because you kind of it's helpful. You kind of have to be,
Yeah. Well, going back to advice, we've touched on a little here and there what you tell people, but say some high school kid now called you because you were in that role that she was in, and they're like, "Man, I want to study this. I'm thinking about it, but I'm nervous." What would you tell them?
Oh, so many things.
Yeah.
I have such a heart for sort of, I don't know if mentoring sounds so official, and I haven't really had many opportunities to do that, but I really knowing that I kind of came into this sort of blindly with, I had a little bit of guidance, but I have such a heart for people who are excited about this and interested in pursuing it from a younger perspective. I've had the opportunity actually to speak at a couple of local high schools about what I do,
nice.
and
That's
do
amazing.
sort of presentations about like, hey, this is what being a props person looks like. Here's what
Yeah.
a day in my life looks like. Here's, links to communities. Here's how you can join the union to get, firsthand stage technician experience. Like, here's, when I was working at the opera, like, did you know, like, here, I'll play some clips of songs and everybody knows them. Did you know all of those are from opera? Like, because opera is so interwoven in like our consciousness. It's really interesting. I could go on about that. But yeah, anyways, huge heart for people pursuing this because it's awesome to get to see that excitement when people are excited about it.
Yeah.
Having worked in it so long, I still love what I do, but it's a job. Like,
Yeah.
It's not magical every day. It
Yeah.
won't be. People who tell you, "Oh, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life." That is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
That's not true. Work is work. Like, I would recommend doing something you care about.
Yes.
Recommend that very, very, very highly. But there are some days you're not going to want to do what you do.
Yeah.
There's some days would you rather just stay in bed, and that's okay.
Why didn't I take an office job?
But yeah, for people who are interested in this, I encourage them to talk to people who work in the industry. Like really, like get a feel for if you want to go into this. Be warned, you will not make a lot of money. Like that is the bare fact, unfortunately, in a underfunded arts country
Yeah.
where this thing that we all rely on to exist
Yeah.
is treated like a like a froofy, unnecessary. Yeah, I won't get into that, but
We all feel it.
we all feel it. Us in the arts. Yeah, make sure that you're not going to make a lot of money, and that you are passionate enough about it that will keep you going. It is very doable. Like, I became a homeowner last year. It's a condo, but like I did that based on some, I'm acknowledging my privilege, but that was possible.
Right.
That was actually in the realm of things because I do work in the arts. So like, yes, you too can make it work. So be prepared for that. Talk to people in the industry and get a feel for, what element of it you want to go into, because it's all linked together. But like someone who's interested in sound design is going to have a wildly different entryway into theater than someone who's interested in costume design. They have different paths. They require different skills, wildly different schools that might specify in that if you do want to go to school, and different entry-level internships that are available in different ways that one might pursue.
And I feel like now there are more programs for more niche art in general. I was speaking to an artist the other day who was in art school in the late 60s, early 70s, and he said he was really getting interested in film, but there was no such thing as a film program like that. That was a whole new, to go to school to study film, wasn't really a thing, or it was just starting to become a thing. But now I feel like there's a lot more niche things for particular art field. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Have you seen that more?
Yeah, I think so. I think do your research. You know, if you're interested in a field, you got to kind of go for it.
Yeah.
Go talk to people. Go research what schools have those programs. Be brave. Be brave. That's actually a really big piece of it. Kind of like what I experienced in school. If you want that information or you want that skill, you kind of have to go after it.
Yeah.
And that will serve you well because pursuing the answers and things that you need is common in, I think, any theater setting, any theater arts vibe, because it is so collaborative. You will be seeking out answers to questions for the rest of your life. That is part of it, which is beautiful. That's one thing I tell people about working in props. is that it's never boring.
Yeah. Sounds very interesting most
that is,
of the time.
That is very true. Even if I might hate what I'm working on at any given time or be like tired of a thing, like it's never boring.
Yeah.
And that is something that I really love about it. I could not do the same thing every day.
Yeah.
I absolutely couldn't. And I do get to do a variety of things on any given day. And that's great.
Yeah. Indeed so. Indeed so. So you've worked in theaters all over the country. And you've worked in a couple different houses in Seattle. How would you, if any way, would you like to see Seattle's theater and or art scene expand? Or is there something that you noticed from the other parts of the country you'd like to see more of here?
I mean, sort of the fallback, the baseline for it all is like, hey, we need more funding.
Yeah. Always comes down to that,
It always
doesn't it?
comes down to that. I mean, because with funding, it's not just like, we want to make bigger, better shows. It's like, no, we would like to support our humans more.
Yeah.
So that they feel more able to do their work and to just, live and create, in which then you get the most incredible art. Like people who are supported and who are happy and healthy are best able to not just do what they do, but give back, because the arts, performing arts is creating something to share.
Yeah.
I mean, I think some art can be very personal.
Yeah.
But theater is meant to be seen.
Yes.
It's meant to be shared. It's meant to be, the beautiful thing about it is that it is sort of a temporal, this only happens once, anything can happen. That magic of live theater is, it's so unique. And that's one of the magical things that I love so much about what I do. Is that anything can happen.
Yes, and frequently does.
Yes. I have so many stories. But being in a space with other people and sharing that collective experience is really magical.
Do you watch the shows often to see like how things go? Like, oh, does that go off without a hitch, or is it just like, you know what? I'm so tired of seeing all this stuff. I do not want to see this show.
In this industry, you get both. You get both types of people. I love theater. I love watching theater. When I was working at the Seattle Opera, I was both running the props department single-handedly and was sometimes doing every bit of it by myself. I did. That's go support the arts. That was a really tough experience. I learned a lot there, and I have a lot of friends that I still keep in touch with there. But I left that role to pursue something that was healthier for me. But at that company, the props department is the props master both does all the creating and supporting the rehearsals and managing, doing the cleaning of the floor. The props department is also in charge of the orchestra pit. The entire orchestra pit setup and making sure every musician has the right kind of chair.
Setup. Oh, wow.
All of the stand lights, that making sure that the temperature in the pit is correct. Like that's all the props department as well. One other random thing that we pick. We also are in charge of first aid kits and all the fire extinguishers.
Really?
And like pianos, random stuff. The props department's sort of the catch-all, which can be both fun and annoying.
Yeah, imagine if you have enough people, it would be fine. But if it's like one person or two.
Yeah, or just getting people for a single show temporarily, and then you don't have any through lines of training. Like, it can be hard. But anyways, working there, I also ran the shows. I was also backstage for every production, making... working on crew and doing handoffs and managing the backstage situation, which oftentimes the props department will be sort of split. You'll have the people who work in the shop and do the support rehearsals and production and building, and then you also have the crew who runs the show, because one is during the day, one is at night usually, and I was doing both at the opera. Wow. That's what that role required. So I wasn't able to see the shows ever because I was always backstage.
You were working.
Yes, I saw them from the wings because it was opera and I couldn't see the super titles.
Right.
Half the time I had no idea what was going on.
I was going to
say,
say,
it's in a different language.
And you know the cues.
You just learn them, and you have stage managers who keep you. They've got the music and they're reading through and they know the cues, and you all rely on each other and you learn your track eventually. But
wow.
Now that I'm at the Fifth Avenue Theater and working really pretty standard hours. I work 8 to 5 weekdays for the most part, with the occasional, if we get into overtime or sometimes I need to help out with something on a Saturday, that does happen. But I actually get to see the shows now.
Nice.
Which I really love because I love theater and I love getting to see it all come together and see my work in the context of how it's being used.
Yeah.
It's a treat. I miss running shows. That's fun in its own right, but I don't miss those really long hours of doing both.
That sounds grueling.
Both
it really
positions.
does.
Yeah.
And you did that for how many years?
I was at the Seattle Opera for 4 years.
Wow.
Through COVID, so that looked very different.
Oh,
but
yes.
it was, I learned a lot.
Is there something about you do that you wish more people were aware of? Like a little behind the scenes.
I mean, sort of, I think the kind of obvious go-to answer is like, hey, it takes a heck of a lot more work to make this happen than people think.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if us people who work backstage, if we do our jobs correctly, you don't think about what it takes.
Yeah, it's supposed to kind of blend in.
Excuse me. I think there is both value in being in the magic of a show and not thinking about what it takes, while also maybe outside of the actual show experience, being aware of how many passionate people and their artistry go into making this experience. You know, there's a chair on stage. Okay, it's a chair. Maybe someone interacts with it in a cool way, so you might think about it a little more than just it being part of the landscape. But you might not have thought about the fact that someone might have spent 2 hours trying to find that exact chair online, to buy it, to order it, to make sure it would get there on time. When it arrives, assembling it. If it's something you bought, maybe that person built it from scratch. Maybe someone spent, a week building that chair lovingly by hand with every unique little element in it. Maybe it's a really unique chair and it needed to be built by hand or modified from something. They undoubtedly had conversations with the scenic designer to choose the fabric, decide exactly what it looked like, make sure it would serve the purpose of the performer, make sure it's durable enough. Maybe it's a chair that the leg needs to break on command. That's a whole thing. Maybe there were weeks of conversations about how that would happen and how that would work.
Yeah.
Maybe the director wanted someone to stand on it earlier in the show, but then it breaks later. Well, maybe there are 2 chairs. Maybe there's a second chair that gets swapped out, right? Like, we don't want people to be thinking about all those things when they see a show, right? There's more important stuff going on, but that stuff does exist. The art form is really, it can be really complex and involved, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
That's how I feel being a props artisan. Of course, I don't do the work so that I can be glorified or recognized for it. But when people get a glimpse of what it takes to do that, and they are like, I never even thought, it's like, of course you did.
Yeah, you're not supposed to. You often hear people in the creative fields, especially like acting and whatnot, say, if you can do anything else, do.
Oh, gosh.
Do you feel that way about props? Or would you tell someone, like, if you can do anything else, do something else?
No, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
If it's not financially feasible for you, then yes, do something else.
Yeah.
But the beauty of working in theater, not just in props, but in any theater field, there are a lot of sort of hard skill, transferable hard skills where, maybe working hands on, like, I've considered at times, maybe trying something else, like doing fabrication for corporate events.
Oh, yeah.
Theme parks,
storefront
store displays is a common crossover for theater because it's, creating a space and decorating it.
I was thinking, too, you could just, like, retire and build furniture. Or upholstery. I think you did do some upholstery work, didn't you? Like in an off-season work for an upholstery.
Yeah, during COVID especially.
I
did some freelance upholstery work. I've built some like breakfast bar, seating for people. I've done just recovered chairs. I've done couches and bed frame, tufted headboard stuff. Yeah, I've done all sorts of stuff. Yeah. So like the hard skills can be transferable. I mean, of course, my context for that is props, but in any theater, someone who works in sound could go, work, you could do, any sort of venue. You could do sound. You could go the rock and roll route. You could go on tour. You could go work on a cruise ship. Like, there's many different applications. But I think the coolest thing about theater, and it's a little harder to pin down, a little harder to define this, but because it's such a collaborative and creative and, work as a team art form, and you have to be really good at communicating your goals and what you have in mind. Those skills are invaluable
Yeah.
to any professional, I think. And
Yeah.
it's hard. It can be hard to market those and hard to put a name to them, but
Soft skills.
soft skills, they are just so helpful. And I think also, especially on the performing end of things, which I have less experience in, but some, performers, actors have to be so in touch with how they relate to the world, with how they relate to others, getting in touch with emotions and being able to emote and understanding motives of people and being able to read people and like all of these very soft skills that are incredibly should be recognized as incredibly valuable to any employer.
Yeah.
People who are people who
Yes.
understand how to relate to others and be in community and support others and have a conversation rather than just being passive aggressive. Like this stuff is built and nurtured by nature of working in theater, really on any level. And I think that is really valuable and, again, harder to like market, but something that is really unique to being in theater.
Yeah.
And that cultivates it.
Definitely. And there actually have been studies done. Google did a famous one a few years ago that soft skills, they like analyzed all of the people who worked for Google and they realized that soft skills was the biggest indicator of actual like overall success and like productivity. And
That doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me either. And so that can be, something we can point to as soft skills people. Be like,
Yes.
Look, see, verifiable proof.
Yeah, well, and those things are so hard to teach.
Yeah, that's true.
They're almost impossible to teach people how to do unless you're just in that environment for so long, like in theater, where you're kind of forced to be proficient in a lot of those soft skills.
Yeah.
People who come into corporate environments who like don't know how to relate to others, who don't know how to communicate. Like, how do you teach someone to communicate better? That's really hard unless you're forced to do it every day and it's by nature part of your art form and this, that, and the other. Like,
It's not going to happen.
yeah,
Not very easily.
Yeah. And so being able to, be like, hey, I can work well as a team, but like not just saying that. Like I really can. I have those skills and abilities, and that you're good at that. Not just that you can, but you're good at it.
Yeah.
Because you have to be good at it to
Yeah.
have any ability to do theater. Like I said, I keep saying it is so collaborative, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
I get to work with just the best people.
Yeah. Well, last question here. Do you have a personal mantra or motivational quote that you live by?
I was thinking about that because you mentioned that you might be asking me something along those realms, and I don't know if I have any one thing that stands out that I like hold super dear. Things that are important to me that I remember and that kind of resonate with me include, there's some lyrics from my favorite song. My favorite song is "To Be Surprised" by Sondre Lerche, if I'm saying his name right. I adore him. He's a Norwegian artist.
Oh, wow.
And the whole song is just the sweetest, most beautiful song. And it's basically prepare to be surprised.
I love that.
The whole nothing's guaranteed except death and taxes or whatever. Like people
Right.
say that. It's like, yeah, but the one thing you can count on is that life will throw surprises your way, which
Yeah.
can be scary, which can be fun, which can be exciting, which can be nerve-wracking for some people. But knowing that, I say this as someone who really likes to have control over a lot of things, knowing that you don't have control,
Yeah.
you only have control to a certain point, but being okay with that and recognizing that life will throw things your way and you can take those as opportunities or as challenges. Sometimes they're both,
Yeah.
but recognizing that you don't have control over everything, and that's okay.
It's okay. Just yell, scream, plot twist, and go on. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today for the B-Town Breakdown. You can join us next week on Friday at 6 p.m. at 106.5 KQWZ LP FM.
Tune in for a new show every Friday at 106.5 KQWZ LP FM, South King County.